Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia. And, of course, every single year the projections come out and they give us a glimpse of what could be in the future. But for some guys, this just isn't enough. It's just a baseline. For some other players, we see this as the beginning of what could be a very special season. So, Pat Fitzmaurice and Scott Bogman and myself sat down to look at some of these projections on some of these players that we think might be even a little bit less than what they should be, and have us very excited for 2024 and what could be for these potential players. So let's hear what the pros think right now. Let's talk about some guys that we are excited about because the projections do love them. Let's talk with CJ Stroud. Now, Stroud is a player that I know everybody here in this room was very excited about last year. I think like Fantasy Pros in general, our crew was more excited about CJ Stroud probably than any other crew of football people anywhere. And gosh darn it, we were right. And now it's about proving it out the second time. I think that's sometimes a little harder. It's easier to be the guy that comes out of nowhere that people are writing off the Texans, writing things off and saying, it's going to take a lot of time, blah, blah, blah. And last year, CJ Stroud got them into the playoffs, for God's sake. I mean, that was crazy. If you told us this time last year that the Texans were going to be in the playoffs, we would have said you're absolutely crazy, right? But he threw for 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 picks last year. This year, the projections are kind of the same, 41-32 for the passing yards, 29 passing touchdowns. So a little bit of an increase there. The interceptions going up as well, doubling from 5 to 10. Now, that's what's interesting to me here, Pat, because we are seeing maybe a little bit more of an aggressive style in year two. A full season of Tank Dell would be great. A full season of Stephon Diggs contributing to already an offense that has Nico Collins, theoretically really good. So, Pat, it almost feels in some ways like maybe the projections on the yardage total might even be too low when it comes to Stroud. What do you think, Pat?
Maybe, but he is pretty consistently in the top 3 for yardage. If you look at the projections and compare him to all the other quarterbacks, they're not. It's usually Mahomes, Stroud. I forget who else is in the top 3, but like it's typically those two, and I forget whose projections it was, but someone had him first.
I would imagine Prescott or Burrow probably in that conversation.
Yeah,
right?
Burrow was definitely in the conversation. So I just think it's pretty encouraging that a guy coming off his rookie year where seemingly everything went right for him, like people aren't necessarily projecting like, a step back, let's kind of hold ourselves a little. And part of that, of course, is the addition of Stephon Diggs. And now he's got this great wide receiver trio. But I like just that the everyone doing these projections seems so unanimously confident that Stroud is the real deal. And I think we can bank on, as long as he stays healthy, really high quality passing numbers.
Here's one thing, Boggs. I'm going to throw this out at you. I know we are all very excited about CJ Stroud again. I don't know how aggressive we want to be in single quarterback leagues. I don't know if he moves the needle for you in Superflex. I get it. But Stephon Diggs now having this reputation of being the guy where he's demanding the football all the time in what was the utopia team effort that was the Texans last year, where all these young kids just bought in and it was like, go team, go Texans. You're bringing in kind of a me guy. How do you think that changes the dynamic for the Texans offense in 2024?
You either fit in or you get out. So DeMeco Ryans ain't screwing around. So
That's fair.
and I think Diggs has to realize I've been in Minnesota, I've been in Buffalo. This is my 3rd team. And, if you're on a 4th team, your career is either Brandon Cooks or you're probably pretty close to done. So not too many guys survive that, moving this much and fitting in every system. Stephon Diggs is one of the best wide receivers in the league. So, and they add him, they get Tank Dell back. And what I think we're going to get from CJ Stroud, which is a bigger improvement than just the slight numbers, is just more consistency. As a rookie, some of those performances, like you would have really big spike weeks and some low weeks. I think that is really that's really the gem that we're missing from seeing these projections. Is I think we get more consistency from CJ Stroud. They added Joe Mixon as well. This team is just going to score more points. And anytime a team I think is going to score more points, the biggest beneficiary of that, outside of maybe a running back or a wide receiver getting all the touchdowns, is a QB spreading the ball around. So I have CJ Stroud in my top 5. I think he's absolutely worth investing in, and I think we're going to just see more consistency from Stroud this year.
All right, I am very lucky to be doing this next player here in this question and answer period with the two guys from the Dynasty podcast, because Jayden Daniels is a rookie. So we have nothing but projections to go on with him in the NFL. Now, here's the thing, Boggs. I look at the projections for him over on Fantasy Pros. 3,500 passing yards, 21 passing touchdowns, 5 rushing touchdowns, 574 rushing yards. Boggs, the 574 rushing yards is the one I keep coming back to because that feels low to me. I know maybe I'm being a little aggressive, but I feel like this number is going to be well over 6 for him, and I think the rushing touchdowns could be a lot higher too. Now, I'm a big Daniels guy, so I am very excited about him, but I want you to keep it real with me and talk about Jayden Daniels and what my expectations could be. Because, look, we just did a show where we were just talking about the strategies of the Superflex League and the single quarterback league, and Jayden Daniels kept coming up over and over and over again as such a value in both of those formats. So when you look at projections, what does that mean for you with Daniels? Do you think they might be even too low, even though they're pretty decent to start?
Yeah, I'll say this. What these numbers look like to me are exactly Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray in Kyler Murray's rookie season in 2019. If you go and look at it, give me the yards again. I'm going to look at Murray for the projections.
Well, I've got him right here. So the yards for him projected right now are 567. That's what we have over.
You're talking about
Pros.
Rushing, right?
For the rushing yards. Rushing yards for Kyler Murray were 544. So that was pretty spot on. The passing yards total was, looking his rookie season, 3722. And the projections for Jayden Daniels are in the 3,500 range.
Right. So, and even the touchdowns are like 21 to 20, more picks for Jayden Daniels. I think the thing that we need to understand, and I think this is what you need to do if you're drafting now, is I think you need to be fluid with Jayden Daniels. I think he's going to start every single game. I don't think Marcus Mariota is good enough to start in the NFL, but it's Dan Quinn running this team now, not Cliff Kingsbury. And Dan Quinn could have a completely different mindset. He's looking at this from the long term, not just for the season. So if he doesn't like what Jayden Daniels does in the preseason and in camp, he ain't starting. It's going to be Marcus Mariota. So I think there's just a little bit more fluidness that we need to have in this situation. And like Fitz was mentioning earlier with the injuries, and we've mentioned this on the Dynasty Pod a lot, Jayden Daniels runs around like a crash test dummy. I mean, this dude,
he's got to learn to slide a little more. That's for sure.
A lot of RG3 vibes here, right? Of a guy that is very, very good, has all this rushing upside, but just gets hammered. And Jayden Daniels is slighter than RG3 probably a little bit too. So the potential is absolutely limitless for Daniels, especially for a team that has just an awful defense and is probably going to have to be playing catch up a lot. We saw what that did to Sam Howell last year and him holding the ball too long and taking 8 million sacks. So I am cautiously optimistic about Jayden Daniels. These numbers are, I think they're good if he starts every single game. I just don't know if he's going to start every single game.
All right. I'm optimistic. Bogman's cautiously optimistic. Pat, what's your level of optimism on Jayden Daniels?
Pretty high. And what I find interesting about the projections for Daniels, Joe, are that so right now, Anthony Richardson is pretty unanimously ranked as a mid-range QB1. Jayden Daniels is like a higher-end QB2. So there's a pretty big gap, and it's like a multi-round gap in drafts. But the projections have Richardson and Jayden Daniels very close in passing yardage, and a majority of the ones I looked at actually have Daniels with more passing yards than Richardson. Their projection for touchdown passes, very similar. Their projections for rushing yardage, very similar. And some projections do have Jayden Daniels with more rushing yardage than Anthony Richardson. The one category where Richardson consistently has a significantly higher projection is in touchdown runs. Most put Richardson at around 8 or 9, and Daniels at around 4.5 to 5. And as you said, Joe, it seems like there's some room for improvement on that 4.5 to 5 touchdown projection for Daniels. Like, I can't think of many stat categories in football less predictable than touchdown runs for quarterbacks. I mean, Josh Allen was pretty routinely checking in at 6 to 9 a year. Last year, he goes up to 15. Dak Prescott, the first 3 years of his career, 6 every year. He hasn't had more than 3 in the 5 years since. So, like, those are just, that is a win sock stat category. Like, that can go any which way. Would put it this way. Would either of you guys be surprised if Jayden Daniels had more rushing touchdowns than Anthony Richardson?
No, I would not be surprised by that at all.
I would be
How
a
about you, Bob?
little, I'd be a little surprised, but I mean, as you just mentioned, and just looking at Kyler Murray's career in rushing touchdowns, 4 his rookie season, then sprung up to 11, and then 5 and 3 with Kingsbury. So,
your point about size does stand, Boggs, although I will say that, Anthony Richardson for, being built like a
linebacker. Yeah. Still gets hurt.
Yeah, a little
built like a brick outhouse, still played 2 full games last year.
Yeah.
So, I get it, but man, I don't think the gap between Richardson and Daniels is nearly as great as the rankings suggest.
Fair enough. Let's talk about a running back that Pat Fitzmaurice can't stop talking about. It's Kenneth Walker III. I have not done a show with Pat yet where he didn't talk about Kenneth Walker. And guess what? The streak is alive. Last year, 219 attempts, 905 rushing yards for him, 8 touchdowns. He played in 15 games. He finished as RB 16 in the half PPR. This year, it's kind of cut and paste a little bit. 935 yards and 227 attempts, 10 touchdowns. So, Pat, once again, I'm going to give you some time to talk about Ken Walker because I know you're excited about him. And I know other people are going to say, what about Charbonnet? What about new head coach? What about new people coming into this organization? There's a lot of ifs here, but you seem very confident. Tell us why.
Yeah, maybe the new coaching regime does handle the touch distribution between Walker and Charbonnet a little bit differently. But here's where I'm optimistic based on what the projections are saying. All of them have Kenneth Walker close to 1,000 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. But all these projections have Zach Charbonnet at around, 120, 130 carries. In games that Walker played last year, Charbonnet averaged 7.4 touches a game. That's carries and receptions. And, he had played a significant role as a pass catcher last year. So considering that, I think maybe those touch projections for Charbonnet are a little optimistic, and they're still giving Kenneth Walker 1,000 rushing yards, that makes me feel pretty good about Walker for 2024.
Boggs, are you concerned potentially that Walker is one of these players that, everything might look good on paper, it might be like a trend going upward, but at the end of the day, a new regime could really change his stars?
No, not even a little. I mean, I have him as my 10th running back. I know his ECR is 16, but these numbers would put him 14th in rush attempts, 18th in rushing yards. But actually have him getting a little bit less in the receiving game than he had last year. I know everyone expects Ryan Grubb. He comes over from Washington, where we just saw Michael Penix and the Huskies throw the ball 8 million times. But a smart OC adjusts to the players he has in his system. And even though you have JSN and Metcalf and Lockett, who do you have throwing to those guys? It's either Geno Smith or Sam Howell, who we all saw how great he was throwing the ball a bunch of times last season, right? Flashes of brilliance with just utter disgustingness in decision-making sometimes. So I don't think Sam Howell's quite ready, especially in a brand new system in a brand new city with brand new teammates, right? So it's probably going to be whatever the ghost of Geno Smith is going to give us. So I think that we're going to see them run the ball a bunch. You have a nice two-headed monster here. And Kenneth Walker, we saw him do it in college, and he's just one of the most impressive college backs I've ever seen. I will never stop being impressed by the game against Michigan, where they knew the ball was going to him, and he ate them up. I just think this is a dude that feeds off of more touches, even though he's a bit of a smaller back too. And I think they're going to give it to him. Mike McDonald comes over from Baltimore, where they ran the ball a bunch. So I think he's going to want to establish the run quickly. And the quarterback's best friend is a good run game too. So develop the run quickly, especially early in the season. I think Kenneth Walker gets a big run this year.
All right. Chris Olave, Boggs, in his 2023 season set a really nice baseline. 87 receptions, 1,123 yards, 5 touchdowns. This year, very cut and paste. 87 receptions on the projections, 12-21 on the yards, 6 on the touchdowns. But I think the one thing you can look at and say maybe there's room to grow with this projection with Olave is Derek Carr got the crap beat out of him last year. I mean, it was hard to find him upright most of the time in New Orleans. They had a lot of offensive line issues. I don't think they've solved them all through the draft in this offseason, but certainly there's room to be a little bit more optimistic about that. If that offensive line plays better, could we see a breakout season for Olave that could look more like 100 and 1,200? You know, like we're talking something like that, where you're with 8 or 9 touchdowns. Does that season exist for Olave potentially?
Absolutely. I mean, they added nobody in terms of
That's true.
Pass catchers. It was, you go in and you say, they don't have any money to spend. The only guy they brought in was Cedric Wilson. They drafted Bub Means late in the process here. So it's A.T. Perry, it's Rashid Shaheed, it's the myriad of 150 different stupid tight ends they have. And then Alvin Kamara is going to catch the ball a bunch. So it's the exact same thing that we saw last year. This coaching staff is sticking probably through to the end of the year. So I think these numbers might even be low, like you said, Joe. So I am more than fine. I'm paying for these numbers and hoping for more.
Pat, that's a great way of putting it. Boggs just said, paying for these numbers, but unlike some other guys like T. Higgins, for instance, like you're paying for those numbers and you think, okay, that's kind of what I'm getting unless Chase gets hurt and all of a sudden he becomes the alpha guy and everything goes to him, right? Disaster for Chase means maybe more for Higgins. But if Olave just stays healthy, there's a chance that if the line plays better, this could be just the baseline of what we could expect from him. Do you agree?
I do agree. And, it's reasonable to have median projections of 1,200 yards, but I do think there's a lot more room for improvement. And if you were a Chris Olave investor in 2023 and watched Saints games very intently, you know that there was a lot of meat left on the bone there. Like just a lot of times where Derek Carr and Chris Olave couldn't quite make a connection on a big play where they were just like, Carr's ball placement was a couple feet off. Or, Olave might have made the wrong route adjustment or something. But hopefully with a full year of playing together, they'll be a little more in sync this year. And I mean, this does set up for Olave to just get peppered with targets. So I'm really optimistic about him. And there's so few attractive second round options this year. Like Olave to me looks like one of the safest second round options you can get. Like I am going to be hammering Chris Olave anytime I pick in the back half of the second round in a draft this year.
All right, the next projection here is about Malik Nabers, who, again, thank goodness you two are here because we need to really look at these. He's projected for 73 receptions, 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Now, he is ranked very aggressively so far. He is ranked basically as that fringe wide receiver too, and I get it. He's the only show in town, Pat, but he's also a rookie. He's also playing with Daniel Jones. He's also playing on a Giants team that really looked just awful last year, top to bottom. So I guess here's my question. Why are you excited about Malik Nabers' projections?
I'm excited that they are uniform, basically across the fantasy industry, Joe, that everyone has Malik Nabers getting 1,000 yards and about 75 catches, despite the, let's call it suboptimal quarterback situation that the Giants have. They realize that Malik Nabers is poised to be a target hog for the Giants, and I'm buying it. And I think the guy's really good. And, it kind of emboldens me that I've been coming up on him gradually in my rankings, and it does embolden me to see that the rest of the industry is pretty confident in Nabers too.
Boggs, Daniel Jones, let's just say, has not been a prolific thrower of the football at the NFL level. I think that's safe to say, right? The high water mark for him, 3,200 yards back in 2022. I get it. Malik Nabers is talented. I understand that. I understand that he is far and away the best guy in a wide receiver room that is very light. But is that lazy fantasy a little bit just to think, oh, Malik Nabers is going to be great just because the circumstances are bad and he's the best of the bad?
Nope, it's not. If you watch Malik Nabers play in college, this dude is an absolute talent. He's going to be a stud. I mean, I have him at 6 among my wide receivers in my dynasty rankings already, 1 spot below Marvin Harrison. So I think that Nabers is going to be QB proof. And listen, the best, do you guys know what the most receptions a wide receiver and the most yards a wide receiver under Daniel Jones has had? I'll give you a hint. Both these numbers are way below. So it's 66 receptions for Sterling Shepard in 2020.
Shepard was my guess. That was the guy I was going to go.
And 751 yards for Darius Slayton in the same year. So Malik Nabers' projections are beating the most yards of a wide receiver by 250. Now, for me personally, I'm a little bit of a Daniel Jones stan, and I think that the Giants have done just an awful job putting any talent around him at all whatsoever. You have Darius Slayton is a wide receiver 3 on most teams. Sterling Shepard was good, but when he was playing with Daniel Jones, he was getting hurt. Darren Waller was a corpse by the time they got him. All they've done is put a bad offensive line in Saquon Barkley behind Daniel Jones. Now we're adding Jalen Hyatt. Now we're adding Malik Nabers. So maybe we're going to see a little bit of an increase from Daniel Jones as well. So and they're going to have to pass more because Saquon is gone. So all of these things, to me, the fact of how good Nabers is, I don't think Daniel Jones has hit his potential yet. And they're going to have to pass more because they don't have Saquon. I think Nabers hits these numbers easy. I don't think this is tough for him.
No Waller, who's expected to retire.
I mean, how much did Waller even play anyway on the Giants? But
if you say his name one more time, Debro and Erickson are going to show up. So please don't.
Well, if you say his name one more time, he's going to show up and sing a crappy auto-tune song.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to do a whole rest of the show in auto-tune, perhaps. Let's talk about a tight end that matters instead, not Darren Waller. Let's talk about Kyle Pitts. I know. You've had your heart broken many times. I get it. I hear you. 53 receptions last year, 667 yards. No bueno. 13 was the finish for him at tight end. 17 games he did play last year, but health was an issue at times. Now, looking at the projections right now, Boggs, 855 yards, 5 touchdowns, 62 receptions. I think about what Kirk Cousins has done in his career with TJ Hawkinson. I think about Kirk Cousins having Pitts and London and the rest of these guys. Look, Bijan is phenomenal, but I'm just talking about the receiving options too, not named the running back, okay? It seems like a two-man squad out there, where it's London and it's Pitts. And for a team that struggled to get to the red zone, struggled to convert in the red zone, it feels like Kyle Pitts has a real opportunity to just absolutely crush these projections, Boggs. What do you think?
Yeah, look, the only number here that would be a career high for him is the touchdowns. So that's it. He had more receptions and more yards in his rookie season. So, and you want to talk about an organization doing an awful job putting talent around a player. This organization has given him Desmond Ridder and,
Marcus
Taylor
Mariota.
Heineke, Marcus Mariota, the corpse of Matt Ryan at the end of his career. Like it's been bad for Kyle Pitts, and whoever is quarterbacking here, whether Cousins is the guy or if the Achilles is taking too long to repair and Michael Penix has to start the year, whatever, that is going to be the best quarterback that Kyle Pitts has played with. So as you mentioned, there are 3 guys in this team that are catching over 50 footballs. It's Drake London, it's Kyle Pitts, it's Bijan Robinson. That's it. I don't think anybody else, maybe they bump against Darnell Mooney, didn't have a lot of talent in Atlanta, so maybe there's something there. I have no faith in Rondell Moore at all. I have no faith in anybody behind those guys. So unless they add someone before the season that I don't see, maybe they get Ayuk in a trade or something. I don't know. Nobody else is catching football. So I think these numbers are pretty easy for Pitts to hit this year.
Fitz, on the Hot Take Show, I said that Kyle Pitts could finish his tight end one in fantasy this year. And as hot as it was, as spicy as it was, I don't think it's impossible. If you look at the breakouts of some Hall of Fame tight ends, I mentioned Ozzie Newsome took him 3 years in the NFL to really break out. Tony Gonzalez, Hall of Famer, took him 3 years to get that 1,200 season, right? It took Shannon Sharp, another Hall of Fame tight end, a few years to get going, right? Sometimes circumstances end up eventually working themselves out. Let's not forget what kind of a talent this guy was coming into the league. Health has been an issue. Quarterback play has been an issue. If we solve both of those issues, I think the sky's the limits for this guy. What do you think about Kyle Pitts in 2024, Fitz?
Right. I mean, this guy was the first rookie tight end to have 1,000-yard season since Mike Ditka 60 years earlier. So there's talent here for sure. And we saw it like crazy talent in college at Florida. And you said it, like we had Arthur Smith, who wanted to divide tight end targets between Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. We had the injury, where he sprained his MCL in 2022, but we found out there was also, I believe, LCL damage, which might have affected him into 2023. So there are plausible explanations for why he hasn't fired the last couple of years. And I know people get so upset when we predict good things for Kyle Pitts. I can only imagine just after you talked about the possibility of a tight end one season, I mean, people were probably pulling out Joe Pisapia voodoo dolls and sticking pins in them after that. But
in all
they didn't
fairness,
pull them out. They've had them out for a while.
They're readily available. You can order them on the Pro Shop right now on Fantasy Pros. But I'm also the guy the last 2 years was yelling at everybody, stop overdrafting Kyle Pitts because he plays with Marcus Mariota, because he plays with Desmond Ridder. So I'm the same guy that was pumping the brakes for everybody the last 2 years. And now I'm saying, hey, it's time to go over the speed limit. Like, it's time to be aggressive, especially now he's at its cheapest cost that he's ever been.
And there's even a little cushion if Kirk Cousins isn't healthy because they drafted a really good pure passer in Michael Penix Jr. to be the second option. So I'm with you. And these projections are telling our viewers and listeners to get right back on the horse that bucked you so violently the last couple of years.
You have to learn to love again. Tight ends, wacky position. But again, I gave you 3 Hall of Famers that took 3 to 4 seasons before they started to really see the fruits of their labor and see all of their talent finally realized at the NFL level. And the rest of those careers, we all know how they ended up. They ended up with gold jackets and busts in Canton. So give it some more time. Gentlemen, we're out of time, unfortunately, but great stuff from Scott Bogman, from Pat Fitzmaurice. Again, we want to hear from you. Drop your comments below in the YouTube and make sure you let us know who are your favorite projections this year. Who do you think is over-projected, under-projected? Which ones you want to talk about? We want to hear from you. Drop those comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to Fantasy Pros wherever you get your podcast. And, of course, you can drop a 5-star review if you enjoy the show and you're one to listen to it every single day, because we're here pretty much every single day turning out content for all of you. We'll be back with more content on the next show, but that'll do it for now. For myself and Scott Bogman, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.